Wonderful. Welcome tonight. It's so good to get to be with you. Glad that you are here tonight. I saw that there was barbecue tonight for the dinner, which that always excites me. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. I never eat before class, but I always ask Catherine, would you box me up one so that I can eat it after class? So I'm always anxious to kind of see what we had. When I saw barbecue, I said, you might ought to box me up two dinner. I'll be really hungry by the time I get home by 8 o'clock or so here. So let's bow for a word of prayer. Oh God, we're grateful for tonight, a time to be able to come together as a family of faith to study your word. We pray that you would open our hearts and minds to the leading of your Holy Spirit. Speak to us, that we might hear the lessons we need to hear, that we might be inspired to the thoughts we need to think, and we pray that as we remember your stories, we affirm our values. We are called to be your people, and we pray that it would help us to go forward this week to truly be your people who share your love and bring hope in your world. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Tonight I'm excited because it is one of my favorite stories that we are coming to look at. Tonight we come to kill a giant. And when I go back as a young boy growing up, the story of David and Goliath, it was just always one of those great stories. And as I said in my sermon, I really do believe that David and Goliath transcends our culture. You can be anywhere out in a secular area and say something about, yeah, this football game is going to be like David and Goliath. People know what you mean. It's the underdog fighting the strong opponent.
Sometimes David wins.
And sometimes David wins, like last Sunday night. Yes. The good people won Sunday night. I was cheering for Philadelphia. That was hard. Sometimes God makes you grow, because being a Cowboy fan, you can't like the Eagles. I mean, you grew up always with the Cowboys need to beat the Eagles. So I wasn't a big Eagles fan down through the years. And I've just, Patriots have won enough. And I'm not a fan of Bill Belichick. I'll just say it out loud. And so just, I've been there. I've cheered for him. Back when Wes Welker was playing for him, I cheered for the Patriots. But that's been enough now. And so then when I learned that the coach of the Eagles 12 years ago was a high school football coach at a Catholic school, and that he was a strong Christian person, and he's changed the whole dynamics and feel of the team. And so I was going, well, this is good. This is, maybe I can root for the Eagles here, at this spirit that he has. And then I found out that the coach of the Eagles is a Methodist. Now, how could you not root for the Eagles? I mean, yes, he wanted to be a preacher. And so he actually went to Church of the Resurrection in Kansas City while he was living there, and now is in Philadelphia. And so I felt that he was a really gracious kind of person. And, of course, the quarterback, what a great guy he is, and a strong Christian. And we got some great sermon illustrations that we're going to be sharing about the people who are on the Philadelphia Eagles and how sometimes the right people win. So anyway, it was a good night. It was a good night to see the David win on Sunday night. I didn't think it would. True confession. I had already told Marcia, I said, I'm just not going to be able to watch the Patriots beat up on the Eagles. I'm not going to be able to do that. And so the confession is, I said, I think we need to take our Christmas tree down. I've been really busy. Really busy. And I said, we need to take our Christmas tree down. And, before Valentine's, that's kind of the watermark. So I said, well, we'll take the Christmas tree down during the Super Bowl, and that should work out well. And so I expected I'd have a lot of time. So we started watching the game, and the Eagles were playing, and it kind of kept playing. And Christmas tree's still in the corner. It's still in the corner. I stayed focused on the game. It turned out to be too fun. No, I didn't. It didn't. It was a good night. So we're going to look at David and Goliath tonight, and some great stories about David and Goliath to really understand a little more than we were able to look at on a Sunday morning. What I wanted to first of all look at is to help you understand kind of what's going on in Israel. Oh, thank you. I forgot about my picture. Most of you know Kara Nicholas. Kara is a member of our family of faith. She was downtown. Now she goes to the Edmond campus, but she's actually on a trip over to Israel, and she was in the office of Simon Perez. So being there, as you can see, the menorah in the background, and it's over in Israel, and so she's going through the office, and she takes this picture. Do you see anything that you think would be interesting in that picture that she'd want to share with you and me? Look at the desk. Go to the next picture, Wendy. The book that he is reading on his desk is the book by Thomas Friedman, Thank You for Being Late, which I've been sharing with you in the sermon series right now, talking all about how the world is changing at a faster rate than ever before. So the book that we've been talking about on Sunday morning and discussing these issues about the world is what's being read there by the leaders of the country of Israel. So we're engaged in the world conversation right now. So thought that was good. She was walking through there and she saw that and immediately went over and stood there and had a picture taken and said, I think you'll appreciate what we're seeing. And it is in how the world is changing so fast, why I think it is important to remember the stories of 3,000 years ago. David and Goliath. 3,000 years ago, to be able to come back and say, here is a story that talks about the values that we are called to embrace. So, in Israel, just kind of so you have an understanding. Remember, after Moses led the people through the wilderness, you get Joshua who takes over right at the edge of the promised land. And the people of Israel are going to move into Canaan. And so you remember what happens. What's the first stop on the road once they move into the promised land? The first stop is Jericho. We're going to walk around the walls of Jericho and blow our trumpets, and the walls are all going to fall down. And then we will kill everyone. And so that's what happens at Jericho, and the people of Israel begin to move their march right on into the promised land. So, if we go to a picture kind of the country. There we go. All right, so what you see with the country, as the people came in, you can see where Jericho is, kind of up towards the top there, and Wendy's got our little, there you go. So they came in at Jericho, and so at that height, and they're going to start moving on in then to this, we call it the Promised Land, the land of Canaan, which means the fascinating thing is, you tend to think the people of Israel move in. Well, there were people already there. It wasn't a vacant lot. It had the Canaanites. There were people who were living all over this land. It was not densely packed, but there were people who were living there. And they'd be living in sometimes a bigger town than other towns. There was no cities in the way you and I think about a city. I mean, if you had a place where 10,000 people lived, that was a really big place. We do believe there were a few places where you could have 20 to 30,000. That was really the really big place, but most places were smaller than that. And most places would have a king for their city-state. You didn't have a king that really covered the entire area. They would talk about, we fought with the kings. Well, it might be the king there of Eglon, or the king of Gath, or the king of Joppa. You tended to have these city-state kings and people that were there. So when you start reading, and you go back and you read through Joshua, you'll see where they're fighting all these different people. Well, Joshua will die. The people have now kind of settled into the promised land. But that doesn't mean all those people are gone. No, they're still at war. You go to the book of Judges, and you start reading in Judges, and you'll see how, yeah, there's still people. Just like the story of Gideon, how the Midianites are coming, and the Midianites had grown strong, and Gideon would get out there. The people would start getting the wheat, and they'd put it into their presses, and they're going to thrash it. So they didn't want the Midianites to see, because they'd bring in the harvest, and the Midianites would swoop down, gather it all up, and steal their grain and run away. And so Gideon rises up to go fight the Midianites. And when they beat the Midianites, then there's peace in the land, and the judge goes away. So it's the time of the judges. So you had judges or people all over the country. When an area began to be attacked or harassed by some of the local people, a judge would rise up. We would fight the problem. When it got fixed, the judge went away, and the problem was taken care of. You'll read about all the different people that they're fighting against, and sometimes it's the Moabites from the land of Moab, the Ammonites, but usually you kind of hear about the Canaanites. And the word Canaanite really described all the people in all of the land of Canaan, all the promised land. And so sometimes that word Canaanite is used to cover all the foreigners who are living in that land, and then sometimes to try to hone in a more specific group. So when you go through the book of Joshua and Judges, the people of Israel are always fighting the Canaanites or some subset of them. Just a parenthesis, kind of a fun thing. Does anybody know what happened to the Canaanites? We know that Israel beat a whole bunch of the Canaanites, and they kind of disappear from history being talked about, but they have been able to identify a number of skeletons that they've identified as Canaanites, and doing the DNA and doing the genome project, what they have found is there are many people in Lebanon who are very much of the same DNA of the Canaanites. And so even though they have gone away as a people per se, there's the ancestry of many in Lebanon goes back and matches the DNA of the Canaanites that they have found there 3,000 years ago in the promised land, the land of Canaan, which becomes Israel. So you have all these people. So we're fighting these people, first of all, with Joshua and then the judges. But then Israel begins to go, we want a king. We want to be like the Moab and Ammon and Egypt and these other places. We want a king. And so finally Samuel, the prophet, breaks down and anoints Saul to be the first king of Israel. And so Saul will become king, and now Israel will have a king. And the people, go back just 1 second, Fred. Thank you. So if you look, what are those, Wendy?
Ashdod.
No, the little hats or something?
They're little squares with something.
Okay, and the name of them are, I can't read them.
So Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gaza, Gath, and Ekron.
5, we'll call them cities, these little city-states. Those 5 were where the dwelling of the Philistines were. So the Philistines, you can see, kind of came in right there along the Mediterranean. We believe the Philistines were from the island of Crete. They were seafaring people. They were and they were not, you kind of always kind of think of the enemy as, they're going to be dumb and ignorant or that. No, actually, the Philistines were very smart people. They were very organized. They were very disciplined. They were very strong warriors. So they had come and settled in this part of Israel, into these 5 cities. And they were getting stronger and stronger. Excavations have found that in these cities, one of 2 things they mainly did. I mean, they had industry. Their towns were laid out. And they would have a certain part of the town, and it was really for making olive oil. They were known for olive oil. And so they would grow all these olives and these groves, and then they had their little factory, if you will, and it was producing olive oil. The other thing they were great at producing was fermented spirits, beer and wine. So here was the 5 beer-producing cities in Israel, controlled by the Philistines. And in the end, they decided, we want to take the country. And so what they began to do was to move along these valleys, and as they moved along the valleys, they were heading, it's called the Shephelah valleys, and so it would be moving towards Jerusalem, and right through there are all these valleys that come along. It's a beautiful part of Israel, and they decided to move through there so that they could cut the country in half. And they would then try to be the conquerors and be able to take it. And it's, as we're going to see in a second, we're going to come back to it, it's as they began to move towards Jerusalem that word came to Saul, the Philistines are on the move. We've got to go confront them so they don't begin to take the country, split us in half as they move through the Shephelah, these valleys. So the main opponent, the main enemy of Israel, as Saul comes into being, is going to be the Philistines. You're not going to hear so much of them fighting the Canaanites. David will fight the Philistines. Solomon will fight the Philistines. They are now going to become the number one enemy. And so if you're reading through Joshua, Judges, and then into 1 and 2 Samuel, if you're paying attention, you'll catch the change from fighting the Canaanites and all these others to now we're fighting the Philistines. The Philistines also, as I said, they were very smart, organized, and they had one piece of science that the people of Israel didn't have: iron.
That would come into play, obviously, in warfare. For the history of Israel, this is an important passage. No smith, no blacksmith, was to be found in all the land of Israel, for the Philistines were afraid that the Hebrews would make swords or spears. So all the Israelites had to go down to the Philistines to have their plowshares, their mattocks, their axes, their coulters sharpened. Thus, on the day of battle, no sword or spear was to be found in the possession of any of the troops with Saul and Jonathan. Only Saul and Jonathan had them. For years, they had been able, the people of Israel, the Hebrews, had been able to work with bronze and copper and silver, which have relatively low melting points. I say relatively low. It's still 2,000 degrees, less than 2,000 degrees that's necessary to melt those metals. But the difference was that iron has a melting point of closer to 3,000 degrees. And so you needed that kind of higher technology. You needed the blowers, the tools that the Philistines had, and they would not let that technology, that secret, get out. One, I imagine it made them a lot of money. All the Hebrew people had to come to them for all of that work. And two, it was a defense mechanism. They didn't let that warfare get beyond their control. And so you can see why this would play into this story of David and Goliath. When David arrives on the scene and Saul offers him his armor, it's because most of the army didn't have any of their own. And so this would be a huge item in the history of Israel. What is a funny, interesting mystery is that for Saul, under King Saul, the very first king of Israel, they don't have this skill. We don't believe they had the skill under King David, although at one point he captured, in one of his battles, he captured numerous chariots. But by the time of Solomon, they have it. And so within a relatively short time, they go from being completely dependent upon others for that skill, and then somehow acquiring it in the meantime. And one of the things that scholars seem to believe is that during the time that David was at odds with King Saul, remember King Saul became very jealous of David and chased after him. He sought to kill him. During that time, where did David go? He hid out with the Philistines. And they think that he learned some of these skills while he was hiding out with them. Later on, he would return to fight them with perhaps the skills he learned from them. So I'm not sure that they gained from that, but that by the time of King Solomon, Israel would be able to have that skill.
You would hear about the chariots of iron, and now they're going to be having all of their weapons. Israel is about to go through this transition, one of those inventions changing the world and how it is lived, and it happens slowly, relatively speaking, over time, but it would happen during these three kings from Saul to Solomon. All right, to understand a little bit about what was going on, there are three types of warriors. When you had these armies back in these days, what you had was the cavalry, which was going to be the chariots of iron and people on horses. And so that would make up a strong part of the army, cavalry. Then you had infantrymen, and the infantrymen, they would be the people that have on their helmets of bronze. They would have the mail on where you're able to be protected. They would have their spears, their swords. That's the hand-to-hand combat. That's how war was fought for just centuries and centuries. You go fight hand-to-hand combat. So you had the cavalry, you had the infantrymen, and then you had the artillery. Artillery of that day was bow and arrow, shoot the arrows, and what was the other piece of artillery? Catapult would actually come into being in just a little later. Yes, it was the slingshot, the slingers. This actually, we think about this with David, kind of like, oh, wow, I never heard about that. Where do you hear about it in the Bible? Slingers were very much a part of the army. You would have this cords and have a piece of leather or tying the cord with some knots, and it could get really long, but you would take a stone or a piece of lead, a ball, stick it in there, and you'd start it off short and start spinning it, and then let out more cord and more cord, but try to keep up the speed because now you had momentum. So, they already understood physics. I got the momentum. I'm going to let out more and more cord, keep the momentum, and they would try to keep the revolutions to about 6 to 7 turns per second. Okay? So it's now spinning. It is smoking, and as you're getting out more and more cord, and you're keeping that kind of spinning, if you can turn it loose the right time, you can control where this projectile is going to go. And people who are good, they could hit an object 200 yards away. Now think about that. We just watched the Super Bowl at a 100-yard football field. We're saying 200 yards, they could actually hit an object. This is an Assyrian...
It's Assyrian relief. Just a side note on this, when we went on our Reformation trip and we went to the British Museum, they had a huge hall of different Assyrian reliefs, and the Assyrians were very, very proud of their warfare. They were very brutal, and so they would put up these reliefs to tell the story of how they conquered other nations. So these first two are from the Assyrians. This has different battles in it, and you can see on horses. Here's camels. You can see chariots. You can see archers. And then, of course, this is the slingers. This next one is actually a Roman carving. And look at the size of what they're using. Just, huge, almost like shot puts.
So we know that this was something that was commonly used in that day, that people would have them. We also know the Romans actually had tools that were designed to remove when you've been hit by one of these balls? It was the shot remover.
Probably not to help the individual, but to retrieve it for the next throw.
Throwing it back at them here now. What they've learned, physics, you can take one of these slings and you get this thing going that fast around. When you let it go, it's traveling at about 35 meters per second, which is equivalent to a 45 millimeter handgun. I mean, it's like having a pistol to be able to shoot. It really is unbelievable. We're going to show you a person who had the ability to sling. What he's saying is, man, that's bad. That's a slinging. When you're able to take that ball and you are good at it, I mean, you were able to control it, that was a part of the division of the army. We might have our cavalry, we might have our heavy infantry, but we also had artillery. And so you would have the ability to throw, to sling these things. All right, so you go back and you start thinking about David and Goliath. What you have is the people of Israel, they heard that the Philistines were trying to come down to separate the country, so they come down to meet them and confront them, and they wound up being on either side of this valley, the Valley of Elah. And so they would wind up being there. On the south ridge was the people of the Philistines, and on the north side was the people of Israel. You can see how the valley where Saul's camp would be. You can see this valley, and this is where you didn't want to cross the valley. If you got both on either side, we're looking at each other, and now it's like, okay, if we're going to charge the other people, we got to start coming down the side. Well, everybody sees you're coming, so okay, let's get ready. And now they start coming around. Well, let's start shooting the arrows as they're coming across the valley. Or we can go charging them with our chariots. They're coming on up. Well, now we can start getting them from it's a suicide mission to go down and then to come across and go up. So nobody wanted to do that. They wanted to maintain the higher ground. So what's going to happen is you have Goliath, who is going to come out for the Philistines and be able to make this great statement of, send out someone to fight us, one-on-one. The important thing to understand here is Goliath is intending to have hand-to-hand combat. He's an infantryman. He's got on his helmet, he's got on his mail, he's got his sword, a spear, and a javelin. So he is ready for hand-to-hand combat. It is the way that people fight. Now, who expected them to go fight hand-to-hand combat? Saul did. Even when David came forward, David comes and says, I'll go fight the giant. And what does Saul do? Then put on my armor, take my sword. It's one of only 2 iron swords. You can take my sword, you can put on my protection. He's going to go fight hand-to-hand combat. That's what he's expecting. What did all of the people of Israel, the army on the other side? They're going, goodness gracious, this guy is huge. Most people think he was somewhere between 6'9" and 10 feet. I've seen all the different scholars are making assumptions, but somewhere between 6'9" and 10 feet. And so they're all going, man, I'm not going to go fight that guy. Most of them were 5 foot to 5'5". And it's like, this guy is massive. So absolutely, hand-to-hand combat is the way everybody's thinking about it. David's going, no, I'm not going hand-to-hand combat. That'd be the dumbest thing I've ever done. What is David? He's a slinger. He's carrying a 45 millimeter handgun. I mean, haven't you ever seen that
The Indiana Jones.
Indiana Jones? See, one of my favorite scenes, you know, where the guy comes out, there's big old guy strong, and he's got his sword, and he squeals around, like, I'm all right, now what? And then he goes, bang. The guy falls over, you know. Okay, well, yeah, that's kind of what happens here. We come down the aisle, we're going to fight hand to hand, bring it on, boy. Boom. No. Goliath never had a chance. Not with a slinger. It's kind of interesting if you stop and think about it. That starts to be one of the first lessons of the story. If you're always locked into thinking that you got to fight your battles one way, then sometimes they can be overwhelming, and if that's how you fight them, you're going to lose. Everybody expects them to go fight hand to hand. That's how you do it. Infantryman style, hand to hand. Everybody was thinking that's the way we're going to have combat. And David goes, no, we're not going to fight hand to hand. I'm a slinger. He actually had the advantage. We like to talk about David and Goliath, the underdog fighting the supreme guy. No. You had the supreme in the slinger. But it's not how everybody was seeing it. How often do you and I see our giants and there's one way to confront them? Maybe that's the first mistake. We got locked in thinking how it has to be done. Maybe we really do contain the seed of how God can use us to confront our giants and fight it in ways that, yeah, we can take care of them. So first thing really is we have a whole different approach for how we're going to go fight. Now, the fascinating thing is if you take a moment to kind of learn about Goliath, here's one of those fun things we didn't really get to chase in the sermon quite so much. Acromegaly. Well, I've been working on that word. Is that right, Doc? Acromegaly. Acromegaly. I'm sure we have one or two. I know Tony's in here somewhere. We know what acromegaly is. It is a benign tumor on the pituitary gland, and so it turns on the human growth hormone, and you keep growing and growing and growing. It's an actual physical condition, a problem that has been around forever. Acromegaly. And you become a giant. And so we know people who have had acromegaly. Robert Wadlow, we believe, is the tallest man that we know of ever to live. He had acromegaly.
It would have been hard to hide someone taller.
He is 8 feet 11.2 inches, almost 9 feet tall. And so, I mean, you get a perspective. I mean, look at these other people, and you look at this guy. Now, the sad thing is that it starts affecting, your body's not made to be that big. And so you may be still growing, but your joints aren't working right. It starts affecting the organs. We've come across two different bios on him. One saying that he passed away at 22, another one saying he died at 24. But
he had he lost feeling and sensation in his lower extremities, and because there was so much pressure on his joints, he had leg braces, And apparently, one of them was ill-fitting, rubbed a sore on his lower leg. It became infected, and despite treatment, he died from infection at a very young age.
Because, oh yeah, he can make $100 million, absolutely. Absolutely. The issue is your body doesn't respond to treatment. It doesn't work. That's what happened. So they were trying to take care of him. Your body is not responding to treatment normally like most other people. So the other person who had acromegaly, Andre the Giant.
He wasn't as tall. He was, I believe, 7'4". Some reports have him higher, but he was certainly large, big man. Here's some pictures in the upper left hand on an airplane, and then on the upper right, that's a regular, I think that's like a ginger ale can, but it's a regular size 12-ounce can, and you can see the size of his hand, his fingers. That was from the movie Princess Bride, and they said that a silver dollar, if he took off his ring, a silver dollar would pass through his ring. So you can see how this could lead to incredible problems. He suffered from back and joint pain, and sometimes people with acromegaly, the growth, if they have a tumor, it can grow and kind of come up against their optic nerve. It can affect their vision. So it's not a fun thing. They're not going to be the fastest because of joint problems and that sort of thing.
All right, so let's think about this. Yes? Well, that's why we don't know for sure. Because if we knew that, then we'd be able to, from the statements they make here, we could say, is exactly how high. And so there's all kinds of discussions of exactly how long a cubit was. Some people like to say, we know exactly. That's why they can figure out Noah's Ark. And that's how they can say that's exactly how tall Goliath was. Most of the scholars say, we're not exactly sure definitively. So, you have a giant of a man. And doctors now have really been speculating for a number of decades. That's probably what happened with Goliath. He had acromegaly. And so he's been growing, and he's been growing, and he is now big. But just think about all the things Winnie just described. And we looked at these pictures. First of all, you don't move fast. Secondly, one of the things that happens is the pressure on the optic nerve from this benign tumor, and it starts affecting your sight. So people with acromegaly quite often have sight problems and joint problems and don't move fast. Let's go back and look at the story and what's being told to us about Goliath. It says, so Goliath came down onto the field with a shield bearer. Now, why does the super fine athletic great warrior have to have someone who is leading you onto the field? Maybe you're not seeing real well, and you're not moving real fast. So you got someone kind of leading you out to the right place to be able to be. It's going to say when he gets out there, he's moving slowly. He is not jumping around, Mr. Agile. When David starts coming down the mountain, he doesn't see David to begin preparing on how to react. That there's someone who doesn't have on armor, have on their javelin, their sword. It's like he isn't aware that here comes somebody who is not prepared to fight in hand-to-hand combat. It's like he doesn't pick up on that. He is going to wind up saying, am I a dog? Why do you come out to me with sticks? Well, the Bible said he had his staff and he picked up 5 stones. So he didn't have sticks, he had one stick, a staff. Is it possible that Goliath is seeing, which is a part of the vision problems, blurry vision? 2 sticks, 3 sticks. instead of just one. Come to me, so I can feed you to the birds of the air and to the beasts of the field. Yeah, we're already saying, I'm not agile. I'm not able to come racing towards you. Come to me, and I will feed you to the birds of the air. No, I think there really is good reason to believe that he was dealing with acromegaly, that he was dealing with many of the side effects, the symptoms of having this disease. And so Goliath wasn't fast, could not see well, was not agile, doesn't see David coming down the mountain. And so he's standing here ready to fight, hand fighting. And David's able to come down the mountain. He's agile. He did not put on the armor as Saul suggested. He comes down the mountain. He's able to be kind of running along. He's able to get close, pulls out his pistol and shoots him. He never saw it coming. To be able to say, being yourself, that maybe what looked like the strength of the giant was actually the weakness. We see giants in our lives, and why do they look so strong? Well, maybe the very thing that makes them look so strong is really their weakness. If we can learn to look closer at the giants, those things that make them seem so insurmountable, so scary, are actually the very weakness of them. All the people of Israel were not going to go down there and go fight this giant hand to hand. What a big man. What a strong man. Like Andre the Giant, he could be strong, and he is big. But he also doesn't see well, and he can't move well, and he's not aware of what's going on around him. But they weren't looking at that. They weren't thinking. They weren't aware of that. And so they're all paralyzed by their fear. And remember, for me, one of those great points that we talked about on Sunday was, as they stayed up there, this went on for weeks, 40 days. Every day that you didn't confront the giant, he got bigger. In their minds, more insurmountable. Every day you won't confront your giants, they get bigger. They get stronger. Fear begins to paralyze. And that's what was happening to the people of Israel. They were paralyzed out of a fear because they couldn't confront the giant. And yet the thing that made the giant look so bad was actually the great weakness of the giant. I believe our problems have those opportunities.
So here's a famous painting of David and Goliath. This was done by Caravaggio, and this painter happened to do several works of David and Goliath, most of which were after the battle had already taken place, and he had cut off his head. The interesting thing...
I didn't mention that on that Sunday. I was trying to encourage all parents and grandparents, tell the story to your children. I didn't go into the part about he cut off Goliath's head.
We were kind of joking. It wouldn't have been funny at the time to Goliath, but the slingshot caused Goliath to be dead. Cutting off his head, he was good and dead. So this sealed the deal. In this painting, you can see the mark on his forehead where the stone had hit him. And one of the interesting things about this portrait is that the artist, Caravaggio, was a passionate man of art, and he killed someone in a lover's quarrel. And so the law was after him. He did this painting and sent it to the Pope as an act of contrition. And so he used his own face as the face of Goliath to show his remorse and repentance. And so here's a portrait of Caravaggio, and with him as Goliath. So thought that was an interesting take, because I didn't realize that till just recently, but I had seen that painting for a long time. Here's another one. Like I said, Caravaggio really valued the very post moments of the battle. Again, you can see the mark on his head. What's interesting to me is you look at Goliath's fist, he's ready for battle. And even in death, this was how he was going to fight. And you have David kneeling on him to take the rest of the head off. There's not a nicer way to say that. One of the things about this, if you've been to Israel, in the southern part of the area, and we've talked about this at different times, it's a very desolate region. And so many times, and you can still see this today, the younger children will serve as the shepherds over the flock. There's not much danger they can get into. And there's nothing to do. There are no trees to climb. There are no ponds to skip rocks in or, go fishing in. There's nothing but rocks and rocks and rocks. And in the days before TV and Game Boys and iPods and iPhones and any kind of gaming system, and there's nothing else to do, I bet that all day long, that's what they're doing. It's not sandy desert, it's rocky desert. So all you have to do is keep picking up rocks and flip them off. And so no wonder he was good. The whole terrain helped him to kind of head in that direction, and he had a propensity. What is interesting is that whole lesson, if he had fought Goliath hand to hand, I mean, look at that fist. It makes me think of the hand of Andre the Giant. If he had fought Goliath on his own terms, he would have been the underdog. He would have lost. But he chose to fight Goliath in a different way. He saw the battle differently. And he cried out for God, that he was fighting it with the power of God and such. But he didn't see the battle as only one way. For the people of Israel, during the period of the Judges, they kept seeing all these kingdoms all around them. And they clamored for a king. Over and over, they kept begging God and the prophets, we need a king. We want to be just like everyone else. And the prophets always told them, you don't know what you're asking. It's going to get really bad. It's not as good as you think. But for all those years, they wanted to be just like everyone else. And so they were able to finally get a king. King Saul was the first, King David, and then King Solomon. As we mentioned before, by the time of King Solomon, they had acquired this skill of being able to manipulate iron. And by the time of King Solomon, he had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen, and he built up chariot cities all over that area, one of which is Megiddo. Megiddo, this is a model of Megiddo, and Megiddo is one of those places, if you go to the Holy Land, you can go visit this archaeological site, but it's a chariot city on the top of a mountain. It's where we get the term Armageddon, Har for mountain, Har Megiddo, Armageddon. What's interesting about it is you see this ramp, and here are stables, and you can see the ancient troughs. Actually, we think that Jesus was born in a stone trough versus the wooden manger that we always think about, but that's beside the point. So here's this ramp. This is a chariot city, so when the horses are at battle, they run up this ramp, and it's enough to slow them down by the time they get to the top. But this is an example of one of the chariot cities that Solomon built during his reign. He built numerous ones. Well, where do you think the money came from for all of these chariot cities? From the people, the country, taxes. Where do you think all the soldiers came from? From the countrymen. And so all of a sudden, Israel was experiencing exactly what they were told would happen. If you want a king, he's going to take your sons and put them into war. He'll take your daughters and put them to work in the households. You're going to lose so much. But their desire to be like everyone else really became their weakness. They didn't continue to fight their own battles in the way that God had gifted them to. One of the things that I was thinking of was a few years ago when we were thinking of doing a satellite. At that time, the satellite model was Life Church. And that just seemed, here's the only way you do this. And we knew we couldn't do that. And yet, that really was the only, here's the model. You do it like Life Church. We visited several Life Church locations, and let me tell you, they were nothing but gracious. And they were very helpful. But we knew that that wasn't us. We have some differences in theology and the way we approach things. And we knew that we couldn't do that. We couldn't fight the battle that way. And the only way we could do it is just be us. We would have totally lost if we would have done a St. Luke's Life Church in Edmond. It would have not have gone. The only way we could do that kind of battle is just to be ourselves. Even though in some ways it didn't make sense at the time, that was the only way we could do it, is to fight our own way and the way that God had blessed us with those gifts.
When you go back to read the story, because I'm really encouraging people to do that, this 17th chapter in 1 Samuel is where you can go read the story of David and Goliath for yourself. I hope you'll take the time to do that. Just one quick thing for you, though, to show you an interesting issue for the Bible. If you go back to the 16th chapter, starting in the 14th verse, you will read about how Saul has gotten to the point that he now is troubled by an evil spirit and is very uncomfortable. And they find a young man who knows how to play the harp, who comforts Saul when he comes to play for him. And it is David. And so it says, David, Jesse's son, now comes and plays the harp for Saul, and it calms his spirit, and he is so blessed. You then move into the story of David and Goliath, and it's all about how Jesse had 3 sons fighting in the army, and the young son, David, was at home taking care of the sheep. And he sends him to go take food to his brothers at the front lines. And when he gets there, he hears about Goliath, and he goes into Saul and says, I'll go fight the giant. And it's like, who are you? And he says, I'll give you my armor. If you really believe you can go do this. And so then when he fights Goliath, and Goliath is killed, and David is coming back, Saul says to his general Abner, who is that boy? And he said, I don't know. We'll find out. And they ask around. It's Jesse's son. So if you go back and read it, you'll read, as you read through it, you'll have literally a story taking place in the 16th chapter about David playing his harp and calming his soul. You'll move right into the story where he kills Goliath, and Saul has no idea who just went and fought Goliath. Scholars say that what you're reading here is really, we know that there were different stories that were shared, some orally, some written down, and it's in the time of David, about 1,000, where they start really getting written down. And you have what's called the redactor, who takes all the stories and puts them together, new traditions, older traditions. And the thing about the redactors was they really knew that this was God's story. And sometimes they didn't know the exact details. And rather than taking the chance of getting it wrong and leaving it out, they didn't mind taking all the stories they had and putting them side by side and including all of them in the material. And sometimes you kind of read it and go, huh? Well, this is one of those times that you go, huh? And so was David known before he fought Goliath? Was he known after he fought Goliath? I don't know. It's really not important. We know that there was the stories being told all about this event, and it was so important to them, they wanted to make sure they included all of the traditions, not knowing exactly which detail was correct. They got it all in there, believing that if you read it, God was going to speak to you the truth so that you can fight your giants by being who you are, not letting the giants look so big that they can't be dealt with. They have their weaknesses if we look correctly. David comes in the name of the Lord to fight the giant. And he had everything he needed. It literally was a young shepherd boy with a 45 millimeter handgun fighting a guy with a sword who couldn't move and couldn't see. It's kind of a cool story of, yeah, you got everything you need to fight your giant. I leave you with one last thought tonight. David picked up 5 stones. Do you know why? Why did he pick up 5 stones? In case he missed. That's one option. In case he took more than one. I had someone say, well, maybe it's because Goliath had brothers. He wanted to be ready. The answer is, we have no idea. Have a good night.